What if I told you the zodiac you've believed in all your life is incomplete, that there was once a 13th sign hidden in the heavens, and it was erased from history? But before we uncover the real reason Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, was erased, let me take you back to the ancient world, where the zodiac wasn't 12, but 13. Did you know that the ancients believed this missing sign held the power of life, death, and even resurrection, and that its secrets could shatter the control systems that shaped our destiny? Stay with me until the end, because only then will you see why Ophiuchus was removed, and what its return means for your soul's hidden destiny. From the earliest days of human history, the stars were seen not merely as distant fires, but as the very script of the cosmos. The ancients believed the heavens were a divine text, a great celestial scroll, where the destiny of empires and the fate of souls could be read. Babylonian priests, Egyptian magi, and Greek philosophers all looked upward and traced a circle, the zodiac, a wheel of time that promised to reveal the hidden order of existence. But here lies a mystery that has haunted scholars, mystics, and seekers for centuries. In the ancient records, there are whispers of 13 constellations, not 12. A 13th sign, a shadow in the sky, erased from the official canon. Its name was Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer. Why then, in the world we know, does the zodiac stop at 12? 12 signs, 12 houses, 12 archetypes repeated in endless cycles of astrology. 12 has always been a sacred number. 12 months of the year, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles surrounding Christ. It is a number of order, of governance, of control. The number 12 gave civilizations a framework of stability. But 13 has always carried a darker weight. To the ancients, 13 was a number of disruption, of transformation, of death and rebirth. To introduce 13 into the zodiac was to introduce chaos into the carefully built order of kings, priests, and empires. Yet the sky itself tells a different story. Astronomers acknowledge that the path of the sun, the ecliptic, passes through 13 constellations, not 12. Alongside Aries, Taurus, and Gemini lies Ophiuchus, stretching between Scorpio and Sagittarius, holding the great serpent in his hands. It is not a modern invention. It is not an astrological error. It is written in the heavens themselves, undeniable and eternal. Ancient Mesopotamian star charts record its presence. Egyptian temples align with its rising. Even Ptolemy, the father of Western astrology, mentioned the serpent bearer in his star catalogue, the Almagest. And yet, when the zodiac was formalized, Ophiuchus vanished. What power did this missing sign hold that it had to be erased? Some traditions speak of Ophiuchus as the healer, the bringer of forbidden knowledge, a figure who could conquer death itself, echoing the myth of Asclepius, the god of medicine, who learned the secrets of resurrection from the serpent. A dangerous archetype, for in the hands of humanity it threatened to break the cycle of control. Others saw in it a serpent priest, a keeper of mysteries that linked heaven and earth, flesh and spirit, mortality and eternity. If the zodiac is a map of the soul's journey, then the removal of Ophiuchus is not just an omission. It is a theft, a missing key, a torn page from the great cosmic book. Without it, the wheel is incomplete, and our understanding of destiny is fractured. 13 was reduced to 12, and the people were told it was always so. But the stars do not lie, and they have continued to shine, waiting for the moment when humanity would once again lift its eyes and remember what was lost. And so, the mystery deepens. Who decided to erase the 13th sign? And what did they fear it would awaken in us? The answer lies not in the stars alone, but in the hidden history of power, myth, and forbidden truth. High above, woven into the fabric of the night sky, lies a constellation that few speak of, though it is vast and unmistakable. Ophiuchus, the serpent-bearer, stretches its stars across the heavens between Scorpio and Sagittarius, a celestial giant holding a coiling serpent in his hands. To the naked eye, it appears as a man wrestling or guiding a great snake, its body divided into two parts: serpent's caput, the serpent's head, and serpent's cauda, the serpent's tail. Unlike other constellations, the serpent itself is split in two, with Ophiuchus standing between them, a figure of power and balance, a mediator between life and death, poison and medicine, chaos and order. The ancients did not choose their myths at random. They read the stars as mirrors of the soul, and every shape in the sky carried a sacred teaching. Ophiuchus' story is steeped in one of the oldest and most enduring symbols known to humankind, the serpent. Across cultures, the serpent has always been double-edged. It represents both wisdom and deception, healing and destruction, immortality and downfall. In Mesopotamian myth, Ningish-Zida, the serpent god, guarded the gates of the underworld. In Egyptian lore, the serpent was Apophis, enemy of the sun, but also the Uraeus, the divine cobra of kingship. In Greece, the serpent belonged to Asclepius, the god of medicine, whose staff, entwined by a snake, remains the symbol of healing even today. Ophiuchus embodies this paradox. He is the one who dares to grasp the serpent, neither rejecting it nor surrendering to it. In this act, he is not merely a star figure, but an archetype, the healer, the alchemist, the one who understands that life and death, sickness and health, poison and cure are bound together in a single mystery. The constellation's very position in the zodiac is telling. It sits at the point of transition between Scorpio, the sign of death, transformation, and hidden power, and Sagittarius, the sign of wisdom, higher vision, and the quest for truth. Ophiuchus bridges the gap between the underworld and the heavens. He is the initiator who walks through death into awakening. Ancient astronomers recorded his prominence. Ptolemy, in the Almagest, 2nd century CE, described Ophiuchus as a man grasping a serpent, giving careful detail to his stars. In Babylonian star catalogues, this constellation was associated with the god Nera, often depicted as half man, half serpent. The serpent here was not a mere animal, but a cosmic principle, the embodiment of cycles, renewal, and eternal return. Even the Mayans carved serpent bearers into their temples, guardians of gateways between worlds. Hidden within Ophiuchus is also the symbol of forbidden power. In Greek myth, Asclepius, associated with this constellation, discovered the secret of resurrection by watching a serpent revive another with a healing herb. This angered Zeus, for if humans gained the power to conquer death, they would rival the gods themselves. And so, Asclepius was struck down with a thunderbolt, but immortalized in the stars as Ophiuchus. The myth is clear. The serpent-bearer represents the knowledge that rulers have always feared, the power to awaken, to heal, to transcend mortality. But why then was this mighty constellation ignored in the final design of the zodiac? Perhaps because its symbolism threatened the structures of control. To acknowledge Ophiuchus was to acknowledge a 13th archetype, one that defied neat categorization. It was to admit that destiny is not locked into the rigid cycle of 12, but opens into a higher mystery, a secret that could not be safely held by kings or priests, but belonged only to those willing to grasp the serpent for themselves. The stars have never stopped bearing witness. Ophiuchus still shines, vast and silent, carrying the serpent across the sky. Its light is a reminder of a wisdom that could not be erased, a knowledge written in the heavens that waits patiently for humanity to remember. Long before our modern zodiac of 12 signs was fixed into place, the earliest astronomer priests looked to the heavens and counted differently. In the temples of Babylon, where astrology as we know it first took shape, the night sky was not yet divided into 12 perfect slices of 30 degrees each. Instead, it was alive with constellations, some larger, some smaller, their borders more fluid, their meanings woven into myth and ritual. Among these celestial patterns, the serpent-bearer, Ophiuchus, was not hidden. It was acknowledged, recorded, and even revered. Babylonian star catalogues dating back to the 2nd millennium BCE, such as the Mul-A-Pin tablets, reveal that the heavens were mapped with far more than 12 constellations along the ecliptic. Scholars note that as many as 18 constellations were once considered part of the zodiacal path, the celestial band through which the sun, moon, and planets traveled. Ophiuchus, positioned between Scorpio and Sagittarius, was one of them. It was not a fringe constellation, but a figure with direct significance. The Babylonians often linked it to the god Nera, the serpent deity, whose symbol was a man entwined with a snake. In their cosmology, the serpent was not simply feared but understood as a guardian of mysteries, a being who bridged the mortal and divine realms. Egypt, too, preserved hints of a wider zodiacal order that included the serpent-bearer. In the temple of Dendera, where the famous zodiac ceiling still survives, scholars have identified serpent motifs coiling around figures of the gods, suggesting a hidden 13th archetype encoded within their star lore. The Egyptians were masters of symbolic layering. A single image could simultaneously represent astronomical observation, spiritual initiation, and cosmic law. The presence of serpents in their zodiacal art, particularly connected to healing gods like Imhotep, who, like Asclepius in Greece, was linked with medicine, shows a continuity of the serpent-bearer archetype across cultures. The healer who holds the serpent was not an invention of later times, but part of the primordial vision of the stars. What is striking is how both Babylon and Egypt tied Ophiuchus to the mysteries of life and death. In Mesopotamian texts, Nera is invoked in rituals of protection and rebirth, while in Egyptian symbolism, the serpent often represented immortality, regeneration, and the cycles of time itself. The Ouroboros, the serpent swallowing its own tail, was the eternal return, and Ophiuchus, holding the serpent, was the one who understood and wielded this truth. This knowledge was not abstract, but practical. The serpent's venom could kill, but in measured form, it could also heal. The one who grasped the serpent was the one who knew the razor's edge between destruction and transformation. Later, when Greek astronomers codified astrology into the 12-sign system that we still use today, Ophiuchus was pushed to the margins. Claudius Ptolemy, writing in the Almagest, catalogued the stars of Ophiuchus in detail, acknowledging its size and brilliance. Yet, in his system of 12 equal signs, Ophiuchus had no place. The great serpent-bearer was recognized in the sky, but excluded from the calendar of fate. The ancients had known it. The Egyptians had symbolized it. The Babylonians had named it. But later systems, seeking order and control, quietly erased it. Still, the memory persisted. Fragments of texts serpent-carved temples, and myths of healers who defied death all point back to this missing sign. Ophiuchus was not forgotten by accident. Its omission was deliberate, its power too great to be comfortably contained within the neatly divided wheel of 12. The stars, however, do not lie. Ophiuchus still stands where it always has, straddling the boundary between Scorpio and Sagittarius. Its presence whispers of an older zodiac, one that admitted the existence of mysteries beyond the ordered cycle, one that offered humanity a glimpse of truths that rulers would later try to erase. Among all the constellations, few hold as much esoteric significance as Ophiuchus, the serpent-bearer. To the ancients, this figure was not merely a man clutching a serpent, but a sacred archetype of healing, transformation, and mastery over life and death. The Greeks linked Ophiuchus to Asclepius, the legendary physician whose wisdom in the art of medicine elevated him beyond mortal limits. Asclepius was said to have learned the secrets of healing directly from Chiron, the wise centaur, and from observing serpents themselves, creatures believed to carry both poison and cure within their veins. In myth, Asclepius became so skilled in the healing arts that he could even raise the dead. This act, noble in spirit, terrified the gods of Olympus. To Zeus, the balance of nature was threatened, for if humans could escape death, they would no longer need the gods. And so, Zeus struck Asclepius down with a thunderbolt, but in reverence for his divine gift, placed his image among the stars as Ophiuchus, forever immortalized as the one who bears the serpent. The serpent itself is central to understanding the mystery. In ancient symbology, the serpent was never one-dimensional. It was feared for its venom, but revered for its power of regeneration, shedding its skin to be reborn anew. In medicine, the serpent twined around a staff became the rod of Asclepius, still the universal symbol of healing to this very day. This emblem is not arbitrary. It is a direct echo of Ophiuchus, the man holding the serpent, a reminder that true healing is the mastery of duality, poison and remedy, life and death, destruction and renewal. The Egyptians echoed this archetype through Imhotep, their deified healer and architect, who, like Asclepius, was believed to wield the mysteries of life and health. Serpent imagery was woven into their healing temples, most famously the Uraeus serpent upon the brow of pharaohs, symbolizing awakened life force and divine authority. In Mesopotamia, too, gods like Ningishida, depicted as a serpent-bearing figure, were linked to both fertility and the underworld, guardians of transformation through the cycles of existence. Across these civilizations, the same archetype emerges. The healer who bears the serpent, standing at the threshold of mortality and eternity. Ophiuchus, then, is not simply an overlooked 13th sign. It is the embodiment of sacred medicine, the kind that goes beyond the physical body and reaches into the soul. This is why its presence was dangerous to rulers and priests who sought control. For to acknowledge Ophiuchus was to admit that human beings carried within themselves the power of regeneration, that within the serpent's venom was also its cure, and that death itself was not an end but a transformation to be understood, perhaps even transcended. Asclepius and Ophiuchus are mirrors of the same truth, that the soul's journey is not to avoid suffering but to transmute it, that true power is not domination but healing, and that those who hold the serpent are those who can turn the forces of darkness into instruments of awakening. This is why Ophiuchus was venerated, and this is also why in later systems it was silenced, for the healer with the serpent was too close to making humanity godlike. a secret that those in power would prefer remain hidden. Across the ancient world, numbers were never just quantities. They were symbols, patterns of cosmic law, reflecting divine order. The Zodiac, as a sacred map of time and destiny, was no exception. In its earliest forms, as we have seen, there were more than 12 divisions, and Ophiuchus had a place among them. Yet history turned, and slowly, 12 became the unshakable number. It was not merely a coincidence, nor only a simplification of the heavens, but a choice that reflected deep political, religious, and symbolic motives. The number 12 appears everywhere in the ancient mind. The Sumerians, who divided the sky into 12 parts, used a base 60 system of mathematics that gave rise to our 360-degree circle. Babylonian priests saw 12 lunar cycles in a year. Later, the Greeks emphasized the 12 Olympian gods, each ruling a domain of human life. In Israel, 12 tribes formed the foundation of identity, mirrored by the 12 apostles chosen by Christ. Even in medieval Europe, the 12 peers of Charlemagne echoed the pattern. Why? Because 12 represented order. It represented a closed system, a circle that could be controlled and repeated. 13, on the other hand, represented what broke the cycle. The 13th was the outsider, the uninvited guest, the principle of transformation that refused to fit into the perfect box of 12. In numerology, 12 was completion, 13 was disruption. In many traditions, it was seen as the number of death, of endings that opened into beginnings. Ancient lunar calendars, which often counted 13 months, were replaced by solar calendars of 12. The shift was not only astronomical but political. By forcing time into a 12-month framework, rulers could standardize taxation, agriculture, and festivals. The 13th cycle was suppressed, its wildness erased for the sake of predictability. Religions absorbed this logic as well. In Christianity, the Last Supper had 13 participants, Christ and his 12 apostles. But the 13th, Judas, became the symbol of betrayal and downfall. The sacred feminine, often linked to the 13th cycle of the moon, was recast as dangerous or heretical. In many cultures, 13 was feared as unlucky, a superstition that echoes to this very day. Behind this fear was not mere chance, but the deliberate marginalization of the transformative principle that the number carried. And so, when the zodiac was formalized, Ophiuchus was the natural victim. To keep the system in 12, its presence had to be denied. The serpent bearer embodied precisely what the 13th represented: healing that defied death, wisdom that threatened power, initiation into mysteries that could not be controlled by priests or kings. To include it would have meant admitting that the cosmos was not neatly ordered into 12, but instead contained a 13th force, disruptive, liberating, and uncontrollable. Thus, the erasure of Ophiuchus was not simply an astronomical oversight. It was part of a broader civilizational pattern. 12 was the number of empire, religion, and order. 13 was the number of mystery, chaos, and forbidden knowledge. And so, the 13th sign was cast into silence, remembered only by those who still look to the sky with unbroken eyes. The heavens, however, remain unaltered. The sun still passes through Ophiuchus each year, no matter what systems men create. The 13th sign still shines, a reminder that truth cannot be erased, only hidden until the time comes when it must be revealed again. When Rome rose to power, it was not only armies and laws that it imposed upon the world, but time itself. The empire understood that to control the calendar was to control the rhythm of life, the festivals of religion, the cycles of planting and harvest, and even the very way people perceive destiny. It is here, in the Roman effort to standardize time, that we begin to see how Ophiuchus was quietly excluded from the zodiac, its presence pushed aside in favor of a system that reinforced political order and imperial power. Before Rome, many cultures measured time by the moon. Lunar calendars often produced 13 months in a year, tracking the waxing and waning cycles with precision. But 13 months created instability for rulers who sought uniform taxation and governance, because the lunar year did not neatly align with the solar year. Rome saw the chaos this caused in the early Republic, when its own lunar-based calendar drifted out of sync with the seasons. To restore control, Julius Caesar enacted a sweeping reform in 46 BCE, creating what would become the Julian calendar. This new system fixed the year at 12 months aligned to the sun, abolishing the older pattern of 13 months. The zodiac too was drawn into this process. Although astronomers like Ptolemy knew that the ecliptic passed through 13 constellations, the Roman system emphasized 12 signs of 30 degrees each, corresponding neatly with the 12 solar months of the calendar. In this way, the heavens were simplified, rounded, and adjusted to match the imperial structure of time. Ophiuchus, lying between Scorpio and Sagittarius, was acknowledged in star charts, but deliberately excluded from the official zodiac. Its presence did not fit the 12-part symmetry Rome desired, and so it was left behind. Religious symbolism reinforced this decision. 12 was already a sacred number, embedded in Roman religion and myth. The 12 Olympians presided over divine order. The 12 labors of Hercules defined the path of the hero. To the Roman mind, 12 signified completeness and authority, a number that reinforced hierarchy and tradition. 13, by contrast, was suspect. It implied excess, a cycle that spilled over the boundaries of order, a force that could not be contained. Ophiuchus, tied to the serpent and to the mysteries of healing, embodied precisely this disruptive 13th principle. The serpent was already an ambivalent symbol in Roman culture, tied to both household gods and chthonic powers of the underworld. To elevate it as a zodiacal archetype would have granted legitimacy to ideas of transformation, rebirth, and even resistance to death, concepts that threatened both imperial ideology and later Christian theology, which Rome eventually adopted as its state religion. By the time the zodiac was firmly codified in the Greco-Roman world, Ophiuchus had been effectively erased from popular astrology. Astronomers still catalogued its stars, but astrologers followed a 12-sign system that matched the 12-month calendar. This was not a mistake, but a deliberate choice. The 13th sign, the serpent bearer, was simply too dangerous to integrate. Rome's empire thrived on predictability, order, and control. To admit Ophiuchus was to admit that there existed a hidden current in the cosmos that could not be governed, a secret path of healing and transformation beyond the sanctioned circle of 12. And so, Ophiuchus remained in the sky, but not in the system, its light visible, but its meaning veiled. The empire drew its lines around time and told the world there were 12 gates of destiny, no more, no less. Yet above, the stars continued their silent testimony, carrying the 13th truth across the heavens. When Christianity rose within the Roman world, it did not merely preach salvation in Christ. It inherited an entire cosmology shaped by empires before it, and with time, it made deliberate choices about which symbols to embrace and which to silence. Among the symbols that provoked fear and rejection was the serpent, and with it, the constellation of Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer. What the ancients had revered as an emblem of healing, rebirth, and spiritual power, the early church rebranded as an image of deception, heresy, and danger. This cosmic edit was no accident. It was part of Christianity's effort to consolidate spiritual authority and draw clear boundaries between the sacred and the forbidden. From the very beginning, the serpent played a central role in the Christian imagination. In the book of Genesis, the serpent tempts Eve with knowledge of good and evil, leading to humanity's fall from Eden. This story, rooted in older Mesopotamian myths of wisdom-bearing serpents, was reframed by the Church as proof of the serpent's inherent evil. The knowledge the serpent offered was no longer sacred but profane, no longer a gift but a curse. To hold the serpent, as Ophiuchus does in the sky, was to embody a power that the Church declared dangerous: the ability to heal and awaken without the mediation of priest or sacrament. Church fathers such as Augustine of Hippo warned against astrology itself, condemning the idea that the stars could shape human destiny, yet their fear was not purely theological. Astrology, with its roots in Babylon, Egypt, and Greece, offered an alternative source of authority, one that could bypass scripture and hierarchy, claiming truths written in the heavens. To admit a 13th sign, and especially one tied to the serpent, would have given legitimacy to a cosmology that threatened to undermine the Church's monopoly on spiritual knowledge. By the 4th and 5th centuries, as Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, the suppression of serpent symbolism intensified. Pagan healing cults associated with Asclepius were dismantled, their temples closed. The rod of Asclepius, once a universal symbol of medicine, was stripped of its spiritual connotations, reduced to a practical emblem of physicians. Ophiuchus, which embodied the archetype of the serpent healer, faded further into obscurity. What had once been a starry reminder of humanity's capacity to regenerate and transcend was rebranded as a cosmic threat. The Church's demonization of the serpent went hand in hand with its suppression of the divine feminine and the lunar cycles, both often associated with 13. The 13 sign carried echoes of goddess worship, lunar calendars, and mysteries of rebirth, all of which were cast as dangerous rivalries to the authority of the cross. By branding the serpent as Satan's image, the Church ensured that any symbol connected to serpent wisdom, including Ophiuchus, was silenced or forgotten. And yet, the paradox remained. Even as the Church declared the serpent evil, Christian scripture preserved glimpses of its sacred role. In the Gospel of John, Christ himself likens his crucifixion to Moses lifting up the bronze serpent in the wilderness, a symbol of healing for Israel. The serpent, in its dual nature, could not be fully erased, only reframed. But in the official Zodiac taught across Christendom, Ophiuchus found no place. 12 signs align neatly with 12 apostles, 12 tribes, 12 gates of the New Jerusalem. The 13th was banished, its truth deemed too dangerous for a faith that sought uniformity and control. Still, the stars held their witness. Above cathedrals and monasteries, Ophiuchus continued to shine, silent but unyielding, reminding humanity of a knowledge the Church had chosen to fear rather than embrace. By the time Europe emerged from the long shadows of the Middle Ages, the stars were no longer seen solely through the stained glass of theology. A new age of inquiry was dawning, one that would split the heavens into two opposing domains: the measurable science of astronomy and the forbidden art of astrology. For centuries, the two had been one, Priests, kings, and scholars alike consulted the zodiac to decide when to plant, when to wage war, when to crown a ruler, when to consecrate a temple. The stars were not distant fireballs. They were voices of the divine, guiding the rhythm of earthly life. But with the rise of scientific rationalism, the great divorce began. What could be measured was deemed truth. What could not was relegated to superstition. The seeds of this separation were planted during the Renaissance, when figures like Copernicus and Galileo challenged the geocentric worldview. The Church, threatened by their discoveries, suppressed them at first, but over time, the heliocentric model became undeniable. As astronomy advanced, it sought to distance itself from anything tainted with religious or mystical associations. Astrology, long intertwined with astronomy, became the casualty of this shift. Once considered a legitimate scholarly pursuit, taught at universities, used by doctors, and endorsed by monarchs, astrology was gradually branded as irrational. In this climate, Ophiuchus slipped even further from view. Scientific star charts recorded its position with precision, but there was no place for its mythic or symbolic significance. Astronomy catalogued the constellation stars, measuring their magnitude and plotting their coordinates, but erased the serpent-bearer's meaning. Astrology, stripped of its academic respectability, continued in underground traditions, but even there, most practitioners adhered to the standardized 12-sign zodiac. Few dared to challenge the framework that science, religion, and culture had reinforced for centuries. The Enlightenment of the 17th and 18th centuries accelerated the split. Thinkers like Descartes and Newton demanded that truth be grounded in mathematics and mechanics. The universe was reimagined as a great machine, predictable and lifeless, rather than a living temple infused with spirit. In this mechanical cosmos, there was no room for archetypes, for serpent healers, for 13 signs that carried whispers of hidden power. The stars were reduced to objects of study, stripped of their role as teachers of destiny. Yet the suppression of astrology was never complete. Secret societies, alchemists, and mystics continued to preserve fragments of the old wisdom. The Rosicrucians, and later the Theosophists, re-examined the zodiac, hinting at mysteries that mainstream science dismissed. Within these currents, the forgotten 13th sign lingered, a shadow in the background of esoteric diagrams, waiting for a time when it could once again be acknowledged. The irony is that astronomy and astrology were not enemies in the ancient world. They were twin sciences, one measuring the body of the cosmos, the other interpreting its soul. The forced division between them was an artifact of power, the drive to control knowledge, to separate what could liberate humanity from what could be harnessed for empire or industry. Ophiuchus, the serpent-bearer, was lost in that fracture, erased not because the stars changed, but because human society demanded that mystery yield to order. Even now the constellation is visible, standing proudly on the ecliptic, silently refuting the neatness of a 12-sign zodiac. It is a reminder that science did not erase the mysteries, only turned its gaze away from them. The stars themselves remain, patient witnesses to the truths humanity once held sacred and may yet rediscover. Though Ophiuchus was erased from the formal zodiac, its essence did not vanish. Like a river forced underground, it continued to flow through myth, folklore, and the symbols of healers, shamans, and sages across cultures. What was forbidden in the official record survived in story and symbol, concealed in the very fabric of the world's traditions. The serpent-bearer may not have been named outright, but its archetype never left humanity's imagination. In Greece, the constellation was linked to Asclepius, the great healer who mastered the secrets of medicine and could even raise the dead. Though Zeus struck him down for daring to trespass into divine territory, the image of the serpent entwined around his staff endured. To this day, the rod of Asclepius remains the symbol of medicine, carried by doctors and healers worldwide. Few realize that this emblem is a fragment of Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer hidden in plain sight, surviving beneath the guise of a medical logo. The healer with the serpent is the eternal echo of the 13th sign. In Egypt, traces emerge in the worship of Imhotep, the polymath, who was later deified as a god of healing and wisdom. He too was sometimes linked with serpentine imagery, representing regeneration and divine knowledge. The Egyptian Uraeus, the rearing serpent on the brow of pharaohs, symbolized awakened life force and protection. Though not named as Ophiuchus, the archetype of serpent power controlled by the enlightened ruler mirrors the same truth. Among the shamans of Siberia and the Americas, serpents were seen as spirit guides, creatures that bridge the underworld, the earth, and the heavens. Shamans described the serpent as the one who could climb the world tree, connecting realms. Many healing rituals involved visions of serpents coiling around the initiate, offering both danger and wisdom. This motif, carried across continents, reflects the universal memory of the serpent as a bearer of transformation, the very role embodied by Ophiuchus in the sky. In Hindu tradition, the Naga, serpent beings of great power, guarded treasures of wisdom and dwelt at the thresholds of sacred places. In yoga, Kundalini energy is described as a coiled serpent at the base of the spine, waiting to rise upward and awaken higher consciousness. These serpent mysteries, while expressed differently, echo the same archetype. The bearer of the serpent is the one who heals, awakens, and transcends. Even in Christian mysticism, where the serpent was demonized, underground traces remained. The Gnostics, branded as heretics, saw the serpent of Eden not as a deceiver, but as a liberator, the one who opened humanity's eyes to knowledge. To them, the serpent was Sophia, divine wisdom herself. Though stamped out by the Church, these teachings preserved another thread of the hidden sign's legacy. Thus, Ophiuchus never truly disappeared. It was written into medicine, woven into myth, hidden in esoteric teachings, and preserved in shamanic practice. The serpent bearer, stripped from the Zodiac wheel, became a traveler in humanity's subconscious, always resurfacing where healing, transformation, and forbidden wisdom were sought. The 13 signs' survival in myth tells us something profound. Archetypes cannot be erased. Empires can silence them, churches can demonize them, science can dismiss them, but the stories endure. They endure because they are written not only in books, but in the stars, and the stars continue to shine. Ophiuchus survived in symbols because humanity, deep within, remembered what it meant: the power to heal, the courage to confront death, and the secret path of renewal. The story of Ophiuchus cannot be told without confronting the deeper truth. Knowledge itself is power, and those who hold power have always sought to decide which knowledge may be remembered and which must be forgotten. The stars belong to everyone: shepherds, sailors, farmers, mystics. They were the first scripture, written across the heavens for all to see. But when empires rose, when religions solidified, when science turned toward authority, the stars were claimed by the few. Ophiuchus, the 13th sign, was one of the victims of this conquest. Its wisdom was forbidden not because it was irrelevant, but because it was dangerous to those who sought control over destiny. From the time of Babylon and Egypt Astrologers were advisors to kings and priests. The movement of the stars determined when to crown rulers, when to march to war, when to sow crops, and when to reap them. Astrology was not a superstition, it was a statecraft. To predict the heavens was to predict the fate of nations. Yet, for those in power, this also posed a threat. If every man or woman could look to the stars and read their own destiny, what need would they have of priests, of emperors, of sanctioned intermediaries? By reducing the zodiac to 12 signs, a symbolic order was imposed. 12 was neat, controllable, resonant with empire, with apostles, with tribes, with gods. It was a sacred circle that reflected authority and completion. 13, however, was unsettling. It carried the memory of cycles outside of control. Lunar calendars of 13 months, goddess worship tied to fertility and blood, mysteries of transformation and rebirth that were harder to regulate. To erase Ophiuchus was to erase a crack in the circle, to close the door on the 13th force that could not be contained by imperial or religious systems. Throughout history, power structures consistently demonized what they could not assimilate. The serpent of Ophiuchus, once a symbol of healing, was recast as the deceiver in Eden. The lunar 13th cycle was cast as unlucky, stigmatized as chaos. The knowledge of transformation, which belonged to shamans, mystics, and independent seekers, was branded as heresy. In this way, control over the stars became control over imagination itself. Medieval Europe provides a stark example. The Church determined the calendar, the festivals, the holy days, and through this, it governed the rhythm of life. Astrology, once a respected discipline, was confined to secrecy, and Ophiuchus disappeared from the mainstream entirely. Even as astronomers charted its stars, no sermon or catechism would acknowledge it. To admit its existence was to admit that destiny had a 13th gate, one beyond the sanctioned order of 12. That possibility was intolerable. This pattern was not limited to the West. In every empire, from China to Mesopotamia, rulers curated the sky as carefully as they curated history. Certain stars were emphasized, others ignored, depending on how they reinforced political or religious authority. Ophiuchus is one of the clearest examples of this phenomenon. A constellation physically present on the ecliptic, undeniably crossed by the sun, yet written out of the narrative for millennia. And so the serpent bearer became a ghost in the heavens, erased from calendars, ignored in horoscopes, forbidden from the collective imagination. But truth has a way of surviving. Myths preserved fragments. Healers carried the serpent staff. Shamans spoke of serpents coiling up the spine. The archetype refused to die. Still, the fact that Ophiuchus was hidden at all reveals the deeper story. The erasure was deliberate, to control time, to control prophecy, to control what humanity believed about itself. Power structures pruned the stars like a gardener cuts a tree, and in doing so, they concealed the path that leads not to obedience, but to liberation. In the mystery traditions, numbers were never only tools of counting. They were living symbols, doorways into unseen worlds. Among them, 13 held a place of both dread and reverence. Where 12 was the number of order, of completeness, of systems that closed upon themselves, 13 was the breach in the circle, the step beyond. It represented initiation, the crossing of a threshold into realms the ordinary mind could not control. To walk through the 13th gate was to leave behind safety and enter transformation. This is why those who sought to regulate time, religion, and even imagination worked so hard to cast 13 as unlucky. it was never about chance. It was about keeping humanity from stepping into its own initiation. In numerology, 12 signifies wholeness, 12 months in the year, 12 signs of the Zodiac, 12 tribes, 12 apostles. It is the sacred structure that encompasses the cycle. 13, by contrast, is the spiral that begins where the circle ends. It is the new octave, the hidden note that transcends completion. The ancients knew this. In lunar calendars, there were 13 moons in a year, and each moon was tied to cycles of birth, death, and renewal. Women's bodies are tuned to this rhythm, embodying the 13th as a living mystery of blood and renewal. To step into 13 was to step into the mysteries of life and death, of endings and beginnings intertwined. Initiation rites across cultures reflected this same pattern. In Egyptian temples, the initiate passed through 12 gates in the underworld, with the 13th representing rebirth into divine consciousness. Among the Mayans, 13 was sacred to the heavens. Their cosmic count of time was based on 13 tones, linking Earth to celestial rhythms. In the tarot, card 13 is death, not destruction, but transformation, the tearing away of what is false so that truth may be reborn. Again and again, 13 pointed to a doorway, not an end, but a beginning beyond the known. This is why it became feared. When empires and churches sought control, they embraced 12 as a number of order. It reflected authority, hierarchy, predictability. But 13 was wild, feminine, initiatory. It could not be bound within dogma. It belonged to the mysteries, to shamans, to those who sought direct communion with the infinite. To demonize it was to strip people of the courage to walk through the threshold of their own transformation. Even today, remnants of this survive in our culture. Skipped 13th floors in buildings, anxiety about the number in dates and rituals, the inherited belief that it is unlucky. Yet beneath the fear, the truth still hums. 13 is the number of transcendence, the hidden gate in the Zodiac where Ophiuchus waits, reminding us that destiny is not confined to the neatness of 12. The 13th sign was not only erased from the heavens, it was erased from human imagination, so that we would forget the path of initiation. And yet, its vibration remains like a buried seed, waiting to awaken in those who are ready to step beyond the circle and embrace the mystery. Across cultures, the serpent has never been merely an animal. It has been a symbol of life force itself, the coiled power that lies within creation, sleeping until it is awakened. Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, is not simply holding a reptile in the sky. He is holding the secret of the life force, the energy modern seekers call Kundalini, the current of fire coiled like a serpent at the base of the human spine. When this current rises, it is said to transform the human into something greater, linking flesh and spirit in a dance of illumination. Ancient yogic texts describe Kundalini as a serpent asleep at the root chakra. Through meditation, breath, and devotion, the serpent awakens and rises through the chakras, piercing each one, unfolding consciousness until it crowns at the top of the head, where union with the divine is achieved. This imagery is not merely metaphorical. Those who experienced the awakening spoke of heat, trembling, light, visions, the body itself becoming the vessel of divine fire. To call Ophiuchus the serpent bearer is to see this constellation as the heavenly reflection of that inner mystery. In modern science, we find strange parallels. DNA, the blueprint of life, coils in a double helix, two serpents intertwined, climbing an invisible staff. This image, so natural to biology, echoes the staff of Asclepius, the serpent rising toward healing. Mystics, long before microscopes, knew of a spiral pattern in life. They described it in symbols, in myths, in rites. Today, in laboratories, we name it DNA, but its form whispers of something older. The serpent of life force encoded into every living cell. Cultures across the world carried this understanding in different guises. The Mayans spoke of the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl, bringer of wisdom and civilization. The Egyptians revered the uraeus, the serpent that rose from the brow as a sign of awakened power. In Africa, Dambala, the serpent deity, was linked to creation and the flow of life. In Norse myth, Jormungandr, the world serpent, encircled the earth, representing the eternal cycle. The serpent is universal because the life force it represents is universal. It is the current moving through all beings, the pulse of existence itself. When Ophiuchus was erased, this current was also symbolically suppressed. The serpent became an object of fear, demonized in scriptures as a deceiver, a corrupter, a thing to be crushed beneath the heel. Yet the hidden traditions kept its truth alive. In alchemy, the serpent was Mercury, the volatile spirit that could transform base matter into gold. In Gnostic thought, the serpent was wisdom, the one who opened humanity's eyes to knowledge. And in the secret schools of mystics, the serpent was always life, feared by rulers, because a human who awakens the serpent is not so easily controlled. To see Ophiuchus in the sky, cradling the serpent, is to remember what has been hidden, that within every human body coils a living mystery. The 13th sign is not only a constellation, it is a mirror of the force within us that, when awakened, dissolves the walls between heaven and earth. It is the serpent power, the current of destiny, the fire of transformation carried not just in myth, but in our very DNA. Death and resurrection are not merely theological motifs. They are cosmic laws, mirrored in the cycles of stars, planets, and the very wheel of life itself. Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, stands as the archetype of this eternal passage. His image, poised between Scorpio and Sagittarius, places him at the threshold where endings transform into beginnings. This is why many esoteric traditions associate him with death, not as an annihilation, but as a sacred initiation into renewal. The ancients observed that nothing in nature truly dies without giving birth to something else. In Egypt, Osiris was torn apart, yet through Isis was reborn as lord of the underworld, guiding souls through transformation. In Mesopotamia, Inanna descended into the underworld, faced death, and rose again, embodying renewal. Across the Mediterranean, Dionysus was slain and resurrected, bringing ecstasy and life. Each of these myths reflected the same cosmic rhythm, that death is the gateway to higher life, and that the initiate must pass through dissolution before awakening. Ophiuchus embodies this rhythm because of the serpent he bears. The serpent sheds its skin, symbolizing renewal, immortality, and the mystery of eternal return. In healing traditions, poison drawn from the serpent could both kill and cure, making it the perfect symbol of transformation. That which ends life can also save it. This duality mirrors the alchemical truth that death and rebirth are two sides of the same coin. The serpent bearer holds this paradox in the sky, reminding humanity that the fear of death is a veil, and that behind it lies the secret of regeneration. Even the placement of Ophiuchus in the Zodiac reflects this role. It sits at the point where the year turns toward its darkest season, near the solstice, when the sun itself seems to die. For 3 days, it lingers in stillness before beginning its ascent again, a cosmic drama of death and resurrection that has shaped myths from Osiris to Christ. Ophiuchus marks this passage on the celestial wheel, the 13th gate through which the soul must pass to emerge renewed. Mystics across ages have insisted that the experience of death in life, the surrender of ego, the letting go of illusion, is the very initiation that awakens true vision. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes death as a journey through light and shadow that mirrors the initiatory states a seeker could enter through meditation. Gnostic texts speak of the soul's descent into matter and its eventual return to the pleroma, a cycle of forgetting and remembrance. In both, death is a teacher and resurrection is the soul's destiny. Ophiuchus governs this hidden mystery. Its erasure from the Zodiac was not simply about numbers or calendars. It was the suppression of the 13th passage, the reminder that humanity is not bound by endings but destined for transformation. To restore Ophiuchus to consciousness is to restore the truth that death is not the end, but the most profound threshold of all. In its light, the serpent sheds the skin of fear, and the soul steps forward into the radiant spiral of eternal return. Ophiuchus is not merely a missing piece of the Zodiac. It is a forgotten archetype of healing, a spiritual role encoded in the very image of the serpent bearer. Across cultures, the healer is never just a physician of the body. He is the mediator between worlds, one who walks the threshold between life and death, between matter and spirit. In Greek tradition, Ophiuchus was linked with Asclepius, the god of healing, whose staff entwined with a serpent remains a symbol of medicine to this day. But the healing Ophiuchus represents goes beyond herbs and remedies. It reaches into the soul itself, into the mysteries of transformation, death, and renewal. Asclepius was said to have learned his art from Chiron, the wise centaur, and from observing serpents who knew the secrets of both poison and cure. According to myth, he grew so skilled that he could even raise the dead. This power terrified Zeus, who struck him down with a thunderbolt, fearing that humanity would become immortal under his hand. Yet Zeus honored him by placing his image in the stars as Ophiuchus. The story reveals a deeper truth. Healing is not merely about prolonging physical life, but about awakening the soul to its eternal nature. The serpent bearer was remembered not for curing the body alone, but for restoring wholeness, body, spirit, and destiny woven together. In shamanic traditions worldwide, we find reflections of Ophiuchus. The shaman descends into the underworld, confronts death, and brings back power to heal the tribe. In indigenous cultures from Siberia to the Americas, healing often involves a symbolic death of the healer, who must suffer illness or vision before gaining the gift to cure others. This parallels the Ophiuchus archetype. The one who carries the serpent must first be bitten by it, poisoned by mortality, before learning the antidote. The healer does not stand apart from suffering, but transforms it, embodying the wisdom that wounds and cures are woven together. This is why Ophiuchus is so much more than a 13th sign. It is the role of the wounded healer, the psychopomp who guides souls through crisis into renewal. In astrology, the 12 signs describe personality, cycles, and archetypes of the human condition. But Ophiuchus is different. It is not another archetype alongside Aries, Leo, or Pisces. It is the one who integrates them, who heals the fractures between them, who shows the path of initiation when the wheel seems complete. Ophiuchus is the 13th, the spiral beyond the circle, where healing is not about fixing what is broken, but about awakening what is eternal. To embrace Ophiuchus is to remember that healing is a spiritual act. Modern medicine speaks of cells and organs, But the healer of souls works with memory, destiny, and consciousness itself. The serpent bearer is a reminder that the greatest sickness is disconnection from nature, from one another, from the divine. And the greatest cure is remembrance. When Ophiuchus rises in awareness, humanity recalls that it is not merely a body moving through time, but a soul traveling through eternity. The 13th sign, erased for centuries, is thus revealed not as an accident of astronomy, but as a profound key to the healing of the human spirit. When we look at the zodiac as it is commonly taught today, we see 12 signs arranged neatly in a wheel, each with its qualities, challenges, and gifts. 12 feels complete, a number that echoes across myth, religion, and structure. 12 apostles, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 months of the year. Yet hidden behind that sense of perfection is an absence. The missing 13th distorts the whole, like a circle missing its center. Ophiuchus was not just another piece of the pattern. It was the balancing force, the keeper of equilibrium, the bridge that reminded humanity that destiny is more than personality, more than cycles of birth and decay. Without it, the zodiac is not a wheel, but a cage. The ancients knew balance required tension between opposites. Day is only understood in relation to night, life in relation to death, spirit in relation to matter. With 12 signs alone, the zodiac provides symmetry, pairs of opposites balancing across the circle. Aries against Libra, Taurus against Scorpio, Gemini against Sagittarius. But Ophiuchus disrupts this symmetry. It does not have an opposite in the circle because it represents the point of transcendence, the spiral that rises above the wheel. It is not simply about balance between forces. It is the force that integrates them, holding them in a greater harmony. By erasing Ophiuchus, destiny itself was reshaped into a closed system. Human beings were taught to live within a cycle that begins and ends without ever truly breaking through. 12 became the number of completion, but it was a false completion, a circle that concealed the gate beyond. The 13th sign was the reminder that the soul's journey does not end with balance, but with transformation, a death and rebirth that allows the individual and the collective to evolve into something higher. This absence has shaped culture in ways most people never recognize. The Western emphasis on rational order, linear progress, and measurable systems reflects the dominance of 12. Tidy, predictable, controlled. What has been lost is the element of transcendence, the wild and initiatory 13th path that cannot be measured or standardized. Without Ophiuchus, astrology has often been reduced to personality typing, rather than the profound map of the soul's initiation it once was. The missing sign is the missing depth. The acknowledgement that destiny is not only about traits and tendencies, but about passage through transformation and integration into the eternal. Even in modern spiritual movements, we sense this lack. People search for balance in relationships, careers, health, but something always feels incomplete. That is because balance is not the end of the story. Beyond balance is breakthrough. Ophiuchus was the key to that breakthrough, the sign that held the serpent of wisdom, showing that healing and transformation are destiny itself. Without it, humanity's spiritual map has been lopsided for centuries. The 12 signs alone describe the cycle of life, but Ophiuchus revealed how to step beyond it into the soul's higher purpose. Restoring Ophiuchus to the zodiac is not about adding a forgotten constellation to horoscopes. It is about restoring cosmic balance, acknowledging that destiny is not only to walk in circles, but to spiral upward. The missing sign completes the picture by reminding us that every ending is a doorway, and every balance achieved is a platform for the soul to rise into the infinite. Between Scorpio and Sagittarius lies a strange threshold in the heavens, a place the ancients did not overlook, but later systems chose to forget. It is here that Ophiuchus rises, not neatly within the 12-fold symmetry of the Zodiac, but standing between two immense forces. Scorpio governs death, endings, the descent into shadow and transformation. Sagittarius carries the fire of vision, expansion, and the pursuit of truth. To be born under the stars of Ophiuchus is to inhabit the liminal space between them, to die and to be reborn, to stand at the gate where darkness gives way to light. Astronomically, the sun passes through Ophiuchus roughly from late November to mid-December, crossing a constellation that stretches across the ecliptic. It interrupts the otherwise tidy march of 12 signs and reminds us that the sky is not a circle of order, but a living pattern. This zone between Scorpio and Sagittarius is charged with a unique energy. The ancients saw it as the serpent passage, the place where knowledge of life and death, poison and cure, destruction and renewal converged. Modern astrologers often ignore it, but those who preserve its memory say it carries the destiny of the 13th path, one not of balance alone, but of initiation. Scorpio's energy plunges into depths. It is about endings, the confrontation with mortality, power, and transformation through death. Sagittarius, by contrast, fires upward, the quest for wisdom, expansion, and cosmic truth. Ophiuchus sits between these polarities as the bridge. It carries the serpent of Scorpio in one hand and points to the heavens of Sagittarius with the other. In this role, it is the reconciler, the healer, who shows that the end is never final, that the descent is preparation for ascent. Without Ophiuchus, the zodiac wheel moves from death to vision. Without the healing that makes such a leap possible, it leaves the cycle incomplete. Mystics understood liminality as sacred. In rites of passage, the initiate left behind the old life, entered the in-between state, and only then emerged transformed. Ophiuchus represents this in-between. It is the liminal constellation, the one that governs transition. Its erasure deprived humanity of the reminder that transitions are not errors in the cycle, but the very heart of transformation. The healer stands in thresholds, bearing the serpent not to conquer it, but to wield it as medicine. In myth, thresholds are always guarded. Heroes who crossed from the underworld to the upper world did so only after trials and initiations. Ophiuchus is the celestial guardian of this passage. It governs not just the end of one phase and the beginning of another, but the sacred tension between them. In the body, this is mirrored in the serpent energy of Kundalini. It rises only after death to the lower self is faced, only when the threshold has been honored. To restore Ophiuchus to consciousness is to restore awareness of thresholds in life. Between endings and new beginnings lies a space of great power, often uncomfortable, often hidden. It is in that liminal passage that destiny reshapes itself. Ophiuchus reminds us that the soul does not move cleanly from one state to another. It passes through the in-between, the 13th gate, where healing, death, and rebirth intertwine into one eternal mystery. Shadow and light are twin teachers that follow the soul through every stage of existence. One cannot be understood without the other. Ophiuchus, standing between Scorpio and Sagittarius, embodies this paradox more fully than any of the 12 signs. It is the constellation of the serpent bearer, the healer who holds both venom and antidote in his grasp. In this image lies a profound truth, that power always carries temptation, and only by facing it can transcendence be won. The serpent itself has long symbolized duality. It is feared for its poison, yet revered for its wisdom. In Greek myth, Asclepius, the healer associated with Ophiuchus, learned to master the serpent's secrets. He understood that what can kill can also cure, depending on how it is used. The same force that destroys can become the force that saves. In this lies the lesson of shadow and light. Power without wisdom leads to destruction, but power guided by spirit leads to healing and transcendence. Throughout history, rulers and empires have sought to wield cosmic power without acknowledging this balance. By erasing Ophiuchus, they removed the reminder that power always has a shadow, and that those who seek control without inner transformation are destined to fall. The serpent became demonized in religious texts, cast as the deceiver rather than the healer, because acknowledging its duality would mean acknowledging that authority itself must walk through temptation and death before reaching wisdom. In spiritual traditions, the shadow is not an enemy, but a teacher. Jungian psychology speaks of the shadow as the hidden aspects of the self, those impulses and fears we repress. When ignored, the shadow controls us unconsciously, but when faced and integrated, it becomes a source of power and authenticity. Ophiuchus carries this teaching in its mythic role. It does not cast out the serpent, but embraces it, showing that wisdom is born not by denying the shadow, but by mastering it. Light, too, can blind. When one clings only to visions of purity or transcendence, one risks bypassing the real work of transformation. This is why Ophiuchus stands between Scorpio and Sagittarius, between death and vision, between shadow and light. The lesson here is that transcendence does not mean escaping the shadow, but carrying it into the light. The true healer does not deny temptation or darkness, but transforms it into fuel for awakening. Every soul encounters this trial. In myths, heroes always descend into shadow before claiming their light, from Gilgamesh facing death, to Christ in the desert, to the Buddha under the Bodhi tree. Each must meet the serpent of temptation and decide whether to misuse power or to rise above it. Ophiuchus holds this story in the sky, the archetype of one who stands at the threshold and chooses transformation over corruption. The 13th sign teaches that human destiny is not about avoiding shadow or clinging to light. It is about weaving them together into wholeness. The healer of souls must know poison to offer cure, must know death to reveal life, must carry shadow so that true light can be born. In this cosmic balance, the serpent is no longer a threat but a guide, leading the soul through temptation into transcendence. Since the dawn of civilization, the figure of the healer has stood at the crossroads of medicine and mysticism. In the temples of Egypt, the courts of Babylon, the sanctuaries of Greece, and the villages of countless indigenous peoples, healing was never reduced to the body alone. It was an art of the soul, a balance of spirit and matter, a dialogue with forces greater than oneself. Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, embodies this lineage. His constellation was not merely a symbol in the sky, but a reflection of the archetype of the healer, one who understood that the boundary between science and spirituality was an illusion. In Greece, the cult of Asclepius, linked directly to Ophiuchus, reveals how medicine and mysticism were once one. Patients entered the Asclepian, not like modern hospitals, but like temples of initiation. There they fasted, prayed, and slept in sacred chambers, awaiting dreams that would guide their healing. Priests and healers would interpret these visions, prescribing not just herbs and remedies, but rituals for the soul. The serpent, coiled around Asclepius's staff, reminded seekers that healing came through transformation, that poison itself could become cure, that sickness was often a message from the unseen realms. This union of medicine and mysticism was considered so powerful that the Romans carried it into their own traditions, spreading it throughout their empire. Egypt held similar wisdom. Priests of Sekhmet and Imhotep were healers, astronomers, and magicians all at once. They observed the stars to diagnose imbalance, prepared remedies from plants and minerals, and invoked divine names to restore harmony. In these systems, sickness was rarely seen as random. It was a sign of disharmony between the individual, the cosmos, and the gods. To heal was to restore alignment with Ma'at, the universal order. Here too, Ophiuchus finds his reflection, the one who bridges above and below, curing the body by curing the spirit. This heritage did not vanish, but went underground. In medieval Europe, healers and midwives carried remnants of this wisdom, using herbs, charms, and whispered prayers. Alchemists, heirs to Hermetic teachings, sought not only to transmute metals, but to transmute the human spirit, believing that illness arose from imbalance in both body and soul. Many of these figures were persecuted, accused of witchcraft, because their knowledge threatened the rigid boundaries between religion, science, and authority. In truth, they carried forward the Ophiuchian tradition, the serpentine path that knew healing is never only physical. Even today, echoes of this union survive. Holistic medicine, energy healing, and practices like acupuncture or Reiki all spring from the same ancient well. They remind us that the body is not a machine, but a vessel of consciousness, woven into the rhythms of earth and cosmos. Science may isolate chemicals and measure cells, but mysticism remembers that health is also love, harmony, and spiritual wholeness. The serpent bearer speaks to this union, that true medicine cannot exclude the mysteries of the soul, and true mysticism must honor the wisdom of the body. By restoring Ophiuchus, we are reminded of this lost balance. Humanity once trusted in healers who saw both the visible and invisible, who carried the serpent without fear. To reclaim this 13th sign is to reclaim the understanding that health is not only survival, but awakening. The healer of souls is still with us, in every tradition that dares to see the body as sacred, the spirit as medicine, and the serpent as the keeper of life's deepest secrets. Across the ancient world, serpents were never just creatures of earth. They were living symbols of paradox, embodiments of both poison and cure, death and renewal. The serpent could strike with venom that ended life, yet the same venom, in the right measure, became the basis of antidotes and medicines. This duality was not lost on the ancients, who saw in the serpent a mirror of the soul's own mysteries. To walk the path of Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer, was to hold this paradox in one's hands, to learn that destruction and rebirth are not enemies, but phases of the same eternal current. In Mesopotamia, serpents were linked with the god Ningishzida, whose name means Lord of the Good Tree. He was often depicted with a staff entwined by serpents, a symbol that later echoed through the Greek caduceus. His association was not with death alone, but with fertility, renewal, and the underworld. Similarly, in Egypt, the Uraeus serpent on the pharaoh's brow symbolized sovereignty and divine protection, a reminder that power required alignment with both the destructive and regenerative aspects of life. To wear the serpent was to claim mastery over the threshold between chaos and order. Greek mythology carried this legacy through Asclepius, the healer. Legend tells that he gained his wisdom after observing a serpent bring herbs to another serpent, reviving it from death. From this, Asclepius learned the secret of healing and resurrection, secrets he passed on to humankind. The serpent's venom, properly understood, became the very tool of restoration. In this, we see the essence of alchemy, that within the forces of destruction lies the seed of creation. The serpent does not kill for its own sake. It reveals that death is never final, but a gate to transformation. Alchemy itself, as practiced in Hermetic and medieval traditions, took the serpent as its emblem. The Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, signified eternal return, the cycle of endings and beginnings feeding one another. To the alchemist, this was not metaphor alone. It was the key to transmutation. Lead into gold, sickness into health, ignorance into wisdom. The serpent's cycle of shedding its skin reflected the initiate's own passage through death of the old self and rebirth into higher consciousness. Poison, when faced and integrated, became medicine. Shadow, when embraced, became light. Even in modern science, we find echoes of this truth. Venoms of snakes are studied for their potential to heal. Compounds from cobra venom used for pain relief. Rattlesnake proteins investigated for dissolving blood clots. Viper toxins explored for cancer treatment. What once seemed purely destructive reveals itself as curative when understood through wisdom. The serpent still whispers the same lesson it has for millennia. What we fear holds the power to heal, if only we dare to master it. Ophiuchus stands as the eternal alchemist. He holds the serpent not to destroy it, but to wield its power with balance. His constellation bridges Scorpio, the realm of death and transformation, with Sagittarius, the seeker of higher wisdom. In this position, Ophiuchus reveals that the two are inseparable. Wisdom is born from transformation, and transformation is born from facing death. Just as poison can become cure, destruction can become rebirth. The serpent is not an enemy to be crushed, but a teacher whose paradox opens the way to immortality. The alchemy of serpents is the alchemy of the soul. Every ending you face, every shadow that seems too heavy to bear, contains within it the seed of renewal. To hold the serpent is to understand this mystery. To become Ophiuchus is to step into the eternal cycle, to take the poison of life and turn it into medicine, to see death not as final, but as the most profound act of rebirth. Ophiuchus has always been more than a forgotten constellation. It is a sign that speaks to cycles far greater than individual lives, cycles that mark humanity's collective evolution. The ancients believed time was not linear but circular, patterned by great cosmic rhythms. Plato wrote of the great year, a vast cycle in which the heavens turned like a wheel, bringing eras of rise and fall, light and shadow. Within this vision, Ophiuchus plays a hidden role, a 13th gate that appears not only in the Zodiac but within the epochs that shape civilization itself. The concept of the ages, familiar through astrology's Age of Pisces and the coming Age of Aquarius, reflects humanity's journey through the constellations over a cycle of roughly 25,800 years, known as the precession of the equinoxes. This slow turning caused by the wobble of the Earth's axis was carefully tracked by Babylonian, Egyptian, and Mayan astronomers. To them, each age brought a distinct destiny. The age of Taurus was marked by bull worship and earthbound fertility cults. The age of Aries by warrior cultures and conquest. The age of Pisces by faith, sacrifice and duality. Now we move into Aquarius, the age of collective awakening, technology, and higher mind. But between these grand ages, there are liminal thresholds, places of transition where old structures die and new ones emerge. Ophiuchus embodies this threshold. Its placement between Scorpio and Sagittarius situates it exactly where humanity must die to the old and reach for new wisdom. In this way, Ophiuchus is less an age itself and more a key to transition between ages. It governs not the long sweep of an entire epoch, but the critical turning points where humanity faces the serpent of its own shadow. These are times of upheaval, when institutions collapse, paradigms shatter, and new visions struggle to be born. They are also times of great healing, when knowledge long suppressed rises again, offering medicine for a wounded world. Many esoteric traditions suggest that Ophiuchus has appeared symbolically during past transitions. The fall of Rome, which gave way to the Christian era, carried with it echoes of the serpent bearer, as old gods were demonized and healing traditions suppressed. The Renaissance, too, reflected Ophiuchian energy, alchemy, hidden knowledge, and the marriage of science with spirit. Today, as humanity stands between the dying age of Pisces and the dawning age of Aquarius, Ophiuchus rises once more as the forgotten sign, a reminder that transitions require both death and renewal, shadow and healing. What does this mean for us now? It means that the chaos, confusion, and collapse of old systems are not signs of failure, but of initiation. We are walking through the 13th gate, the place of the serpent. Here, humanity faces its shadows: greed, domination, disconnection from nature, and must choose whether to be destroyed by them or to turn them into medicine. Ophiuchus whispers that this is not the end, but the passage. The healer stands with the serpent, offering a way to transform poison into cure, death into rebirth, darkness into light. Ophiuchus in the ages reveals that our destiny is not fixed by stars, but shaped by how we respond to their cycles. Each age carries lessons, and each transition tests whether we have learned them. To forget Ophiuchus is to forget the sacred power of thresholds, but to remember it is to remember that humanity's darkest trials can become the very source of its awakening. The 13th sign does not rule one age alone. It rules the passages between them, when humanity is called to shed its skin and step into something greater. In the early 20th century, something remarkable began to stir in the world of astrology. For centuries, Ophiuchus had remained a ghost in the sky, its presence felt but rarely acknowledged, its role whispered about in esoteric circles, yet absent from the official Zodiac. But as the modern era unfolded, a time of profound questioning and rediscovery, Ophiuchus resurfaced. It was as if the 13th sign had been waiting in silence until humanity was ready to face the deeper truths it carried. Its reappearance did not happen all at once, but through a convergence of science, spirituality, and cultural curiosity. Astronomy itself opened the door. In 1930, the International Astronomical Union formally defined the constellations in the sky, setting boundaries that clarified which stars belonged to which zodiac figures. For the first time, Ophiuchus was given official recognition as a constellation along the ecliptic, the path the sun appears to travel through the heavens. This path had always been the foundation of astrology. The acknowledgement meant that, by astronomical definition, there were 13 constellations the sun passes through, not 12. Though astrologers largely resisted the implication, the serpent bearer was back in the conversation, forcing people to wonder what had been erased and why. By the mid-20th century, new voices began to challenge old dogmas. Carl Jung had already opened Western thought to archetypes and synchronicity, concepts that aligned with astrology's symbolic view of the cosmos. In the counterculture movements of the 1960s and 70s, astrology experienced a revival as seekers turned to the stars for guidance in an age of upheaval. In this context, whispers of a forgotten sign gained resonance. Writers, mystics, and esoteric schools began to point to Ophiuchus as the missing link in the Zodiac, the lost piece of a larger puzzle about human destiny. Its serpent imagery resonated with rising interest in Eastern philosophies, Kundalini yoga, and holistic healing. All traditions that saw the serpent not as evil, but as a symbol of awakening energy. In 1970, Walter Berg and others began proposing astrological systems that included Ophiuchus as the 13th sign, giving it traits of healing, transformation, and spiritual insight. While mainstream astrology resisted, arguing for the symbolic completeness of 12, Ophiuchus found a following among those who felt unrecognized by the traditional signs. The very controversy around it drew attention. Why had it been excluded? What truths did it carry that institutions feared? These questions only deepened its allure. The internet age accelerated the rediscovery. In the 1990s and early 2000s, articles circulated about Ophiuchus being the forgotten sign, and debates raged about whether horoscopes were now invalid. NASA even released statements clarifying that Ophiuchus was astronomically valid, though they distanced themselves from astrology itself. Yet the spark was lit. Millions became aware for the first time that the Zodiac was incomplete, or at the very least, contested. For seekers, this was not just about astrology, but about suppressed knowledge, hidden wisdom, and the possibility that the sky itself held secrets withheld from humanity. The resurgence of Ophiuchus in modern astrology reflects more than curiosity. It reflects a collective hunger to move beyond rigid systems and recover the fullness of the human story. Just as the ancients once looked to the serpent bearer as healer and initiator, modern seekers find in Ophiuchus a symbol of integration, of shadow and light, science and spirit, death and rebirth. Its return is not simply a correction of astronomical fact, but a sign that humanity is ready to re-engage with mysteries once suppressed. The serpent bearer has returned because the time of initiation has returned. The return of Ophiuchus into modern discourse was not without resistance. In fact, its resurfacing has triggered one of the most heated debates within astrology, raising questions not just about technical accuracy, but about the very soul of the practice. For mainstream astrologers, the 13th sign represents a threat, not necessarily because it is false, but because it destabilizes a system that has been carefully woven into the fabric of human culture for over 2 millennia. The heart of the resistance lies in the difference between astronomy and astrology. Astronomers point out that the sun passes through 13 constellations along the ecliptic, including Ophiuchus, which sits between Scorpio and Sagittarius. But astrologers argue that astrology does not rely on constellations themselves, but on the 12-fold division of the sky known as the tropical zodiac. This system is anchored to the solstices and equinoxes, dividing the year into 12 equal parts. For them, 12 is not arbitrary, it is sacred. 12 months in a year, 12 hours on the clock, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles, 12 labors of Hercules. To insert a 13th breaks the symbolic harmony, a disruption that many fear would shatter the balance on which astrology rests. Some also fear that introducing Ophiuchus would invalidate centuries of astrological wisdom. Countless charts, horoscopes, and teachings are based on the 12-sign system. If Ophiuchus were acknowledged, would the entire edifice collapse? Would every person suddenly have a different sun sign? For many practitioners, this undermines the continuity of tradition. They argue that astrology is more symbolic than literal, and that constellations like Ophiuchus are part of the mythic fabric rather than necessary components of the zodiac. Yet beneath these defenses lies another reason for resistance: control. Astrology has always been about interpretation, and interpreters wield power. By acknowledging Ophiuchus, the field opens itself to new archetypes, new complexities, and new possibilities that cannot easily be standardized. The serpent bearer, with its associations to healing, initiation, and hidden wisdom, introduces energies that challenge authority and blur boundaries between science and mysticism. It asks astrologers and seekers alike to embrace paradox, to confront shadow, to accept that their carefully ordered system may have always been incomplete. Not everyone is ready for that. The debate also reveals the tension between popular astrology and deeper esotericism. Popular horoscopes thrive on simplicity. 12 signs, easy traits, digestible predictions. Adding a 13th sign complicates the narrative and risks alienating audiences who crave clarity. But esoteric astrology has long acknowledged the existence of hidden layers, fixed stars, lunar mansions, and archetypal forces beyond the 12. For those on the deeper path, Ophiuchus is not a disruption, but a rediscovery of what was always known: that the sky cannot be boxed into neat categories. Thus, the controversy over Ophiuchus is not really about whether it exists, but about whether humanity is prepared to evolve its understanding of the zodiac. Resistance comes not just from scholars or practitioners, but from the inertia of tradition itself. Yet history shows that every age brings a shift in perception. Just as heliocentrism replaced geocentrism and psychology redefined the inner world, astrology too must grow. Ophiuchus has returned as a challenge, not to erase the 12, but to expand them, to reveal the hidden 13th key that transforms the circle into a spiral. When Ophiuchus is added to the zodiac, the balance of the entire system shifts. For millennia, the Wheel of 12 has carried a sense of cosmic symmetry, each sign paired in polarity and organized into a framework of elements and modalities. To insert a 13th sign is to change the geometry of that wheel, and with it, the symbolic architecture of how we interpret life, destiny, and spiritual growth. This disruption is precisely why many astrologers resist Ophiuchus, but it is also why seekers are drawn to it. Because hidden in this disruption is an opportunity to see the zodiac not as a closed circle, but as an evolving spiral. In the 12-sign system, each sign occupies 30 degrees of the zodiac, together filling the 360 degrees of the ecliptic. With Ophiuchus included, the division no longer aligns neatly. Scorpio, in particular, shrinks in astronomical terms to make space for Ophiuchus, which spans the sky from roughly November 29th to December 17th. The Scorpion, once a powerful archetype of transformation, is compressed, while Ophiuchus emerges as the one who carries that transformative power into a higher octave. Healing, resurrection, integration. The balance of the zodiac is altered, as though the serpent bearer steps in to remind humanity that transformation does not end with death, but continues into renewal. Symbolically, Ophiuchus reshapes the relationships between the signs. The zodiac has long been divided into 4 elements: fire, earth, air, water, each containing 3 signs. Ophiuchus disrupts this symmetry, hinting that the universe does not conform to human categories. Some traditions see Ophiuchus as carrying a 5th essence, or quintessence, beyond the 4 elements. In alchemy, this quintessence was the ether, the unseen energy that permeates all things. To weave Ophiuchus into the zodiac is to admit that life is more complex than neat systems allow, and that true wisdom is found not in balance alone, but in integration of the hidden. Ophiuchus also challenges the cycle of polarities. In the 12-sign model, each sign is balanced by its opposite. Aries by Libra, Taurus by Scorpio, Gemini by Sagittarius. Ophiuchus has no opposite. It stands as a liminal force, the serpent bearer at the threshold, unpaired yet essential. This makes it an initiatory sign, representing the places in our lives where we are forced beyond balance into transformation. Where the 12 guide us through the ordinary journey of life, the 13th sign pushes us into extraordinary experiences that break patterns and demand evolution. The inclusion of Ophiuchus changes the zodiac not by negating the 12, but by revealing what lies between them. It suggests that destiny is not just about moving through the fixed archetypes, but about facing the spaces in between, the uncharted territory where shadow and healing converge. For the individual, this may mean moments of crisis and breakthrough, times when old identities fall away and new potentials are born. For humanity, it signals that ages themselves cannot shift without passing through the serpent's gate. Thus, Ophiuchus changes the balance of signs by showing that balance is never static. The zodiac is not a closed circle, perfect and untouchable, but a living map of the soul's journey. By restoring the 13th sign, we acknowledge the hidden initiations that shape both personal and collective evolution. The serpent bearer does not break the harmony of the zodiac. It reveals its deeper harmony, one that embraces shadow and light, death and rebirth, destruction and healing, as equal parts of the cosmic dance. There are souls who walk among us carrying the vibration of Ophiuchus, whether they know it or not. They are not defined by their sun sign or the position of planets in a chart, but by an inner resonance, a calling that seems older than memory. These are the initiates and the starseeds, those who embody the 13th archetype in ways that often feel both isolating and profoundly transformative. They live in the tension between shadow and light, between poison and cure, between destruction and healing. To carry the Ophiuchus energy is to walk a path of initiation, one that few understand but many sense. The archetype of Ophiuchus is the healer who has faced the serpent and survived. In mythology, this is Asclepius, the son of Apollo, who learned the arts of healing from the centaur Chiron and from the serpent itself. With this knowledge, it is said, he gained the power to bring the dead back to life, a gift that enraged Zeus, who struck him down with lightning, only to later place him among the stars. This myth mirrors the lives of those who carry Ophiuchus energy. They often endure great suffering, crises of identity, or brushes with death, only to emerge with profound wisdom to share. Their journey is not smooth, but their scars become medicine. In modern spiritual language, many would call these souls starseeds, individuals who feel as though they have incarnated from other realms or dimensions to guide humanity through times of transition. Whether or not one accepts this literally, the symbolic truth is undeniable. Ophiuchus souls carry a sense of mission, of being here to heal, to awaken, to bridge opposites. They are often drawn to medicine, psychology, mysticism, or transformative arts. Others may not practice healing outwardly, but live it inwardly, holding space for others' transformation through presence, empathy, and depth of being. What sets them apart is their relationship with the serpent. In most traditions, the serpent is a symbol of temptation or evil. But for the Ophiuchus soul, the serpent is a teacher. It represents primal energy, Kundalini, DNA, the coiled force of life itself. Those who carry this archetype often experience intense awakenings of energy, dreams, and intuition. They see beyond the surface of things, reading hidden patterns in life and sensing truths that others overlook. This sensitivity can be both gift and burden, for it often isolates them from conventional society. Yet it also marks them as initiates, destined to walk paths few dare tread. Ophiuchus souls are not here to be comfortable. They are here to catalyze change. They challenge norms, expose shadows, and invite others into healing. Often, they experience betrayal, suppression, or misunderstanding, echoes of how the 13th sign itself was erased from history. But their very survival, their insistence on living authentically, becomes a testament to the truth that cannot be silenced. In this way, they mirror the constellation itself, hidden for centuries, yet always shining, always waiting to be remembered. To recognize the Ophiuchus archetype within oneself is to accept a sacred burden and a sacred gift. It means acknowledging that your life may not follow ordinary patterns, but that your struggles are not in vain. They are initiations, forging you into a healer, a guide, a bridge between worlds. Whether consciously or unconsciously, Ophiuchus souls carry the memory of the forgotten sign, and through them, its light returns to the world. The serpent's return is never accidental. Myths tell us that symbols resurface at the moment they are most needed, and Ophiuchus is no exception. For centuries, it slept in the sky, hidden in plain sight. But now, in the dawning age of Aquarius, the 13th sign rises again. Its return is not merely about correcting astronomy or expanding astrology. It is about collective evolution. Humanity is at a threshold, and the serpent bearer comes forward once more as a guide through transformation. The age of Aquarius is often described as a time of awakening, revolution, and liberation. It follows the age of Pisces, an age shaped by faith, sacrifice, and institutions. Pisces brought humanity into deep spiritual longing, but also into patterns of illusion and control, where truth was often veiled in dogma. Aquarius, by contrast, seeks freedom, knowledge, and collective progress. It is the age of networks, of awakening consciousness, of a world breaking free from rigid structures. And here, in this great transition, Ophiuchus re-emerges to remind us that awakening is not possible without healing, and freedom is not real without mastery of the serpent within. Astrologically, Ophiuchus lies between Scorpio and Sagittarius, the signs of transformation and vision. Its reappearance now reflects exactly what humanity is experiencing: the death of old systems and the birth of higher possibilities. Like the serpent shedding its skin, civilizations are shedding outdated structures, political, religious, economic, in order to make space for a new cycle. But just as in the myth of Asclepius, this resurrection is not without struggle. Ophiuchus symbolizes the test. Will humanity use its newfound power for destruction or for healing? The serpent itself is deeply tied to this Aquarian awakening. In spiritual traditions, serpents represent Kundalini, the coiled life force energy that, when awakened, rises through the chakras and transforms the soul. As global consciousness stirs, more and more people are experiencing this energy. sudden awakenings, dreams, heightened intuition, and inner callings. Ophiuchus embodies this activation on a collective scale. It is as if the earth itself is undergoing a kundalini rising, and the serpent bearer stands as a guide, helping humanity integrate the power rather than be consumed by it. Modern technology and science also mirror this archetype. DNA, the very code of life, is shaped like a double helix, a serpent winding around itself. As our understanding of genetics expands, so too does our capacity to alter life itself. This is Ophiuchus energy manifesting in the material world, the healer's power to cure or to corrupt. In the Age of Aquarius, where innovation accelerates, the choice becomes urgent. Will humanity wield this knowledge responsibly, or fall prey to the shadow of misuse? The 13th sign demands this question be faced. The resurfacing of Ophiuchus is a reminder that forgotten wisdom returns when it is most essential. It was erased in ages past to preserve control, but in the Aquarian dawn, control is dissolving. Information is flowing freely, secrets are being exposed, and hidden knowledge is coming to light. Ophiuchus reappears as both a challenge and an initiation, urging humanity to embrace transformation consciously. The serpent bearer stands not as an extra sign, but as the archetype of the healer who walks with the serpent and emerges reborn, a mirror for what humanity must now become. When the zodiac is restored to 13 signs, the hidden destiny of humanity begins to emerge in a way that many ancient seers foresaw, but few dared to proclaim. The traditional 12-sign wheel has been a powerful tool for thousands of years, shaping culture, calendars, and the very rhythm of our civilizations. Yet beneath this framework lies the unspoken 13th, Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer. Its absence has long been a silence in the heavens, a gap in the cosmic mirror, a forgotten note in the great symphony of time. To restore it is not just an astronomical adjustment, it is a spiritual revelation, a returning of balance, and a reminder that destiny was always more complex than what the simplified circle suggested. When Ophiuchus is acknowledged, the zodiac ceases to be a perfect 12-fold division, echoing the months and the old solar cycles. Instead, it becomes something more aligned with the living sky itself, more fluid, less symmetrical, and more honest. And in this shift, humanity is asked to reckon with truths that were smoothed over for convenience. We are reminded that destiny is not neat or perfectly ordered. It bends, it twists, it includes shadows and mysteries. The serpent always symbolized both danger and healing, death and rebirth. To integrate Ophiuchus is to integrate the paradox. That wisdom comes through struggle. That wholeness includes what was once excluded. Astronomically, the sun does pass through the constellation of Ophiuchus between late November and mid-December. Yet for centuries, astrologers left it out, preferring the harmony of 12. The Babylonians knew of its place in the ecliptic, but chose omission, possibly because their calendar needed to align with agricultural and ritual cycles that worked in 12s. But mystics across cultures whispered of a hidden sign, a secret key to cycles of transformation. In Egyptian texts, the serpent and staff were emblems of resurrection. In Greek myth, Asclepius, associated with Ophiuchus, was the healer who could raise the dead. When you restore that figure to the heavens, the message is unmistakable. Humanity's path forward is not merely one of continuation, but of resurrection, of learning to walk between life and death with wisdom. In the Age of Aquarius, this 13th sign takes on heightened meaning. Aquarius itself is about breaking structures, dissolving hierarchies and birthing a more fluid collective consciousness. To bring Ophiuchus back at this moment is to confront the very core of that shift. It tells us we are no longer bound to the rigid patterns of the past. The neatness of 12 collapses into the wild, living 13. Our hidden destiny is not uniformity, but inclusion of the outcast, remembrance of the forgotten, integration of the serpent's power. This is the sign of healers, shamans, and those who walk the liminal path between spirit and matter. What happens when the zodiac is restored to 13 is not simply that horoscopes shift or that birth charts expand. It is that humanity itself confronts a forgotten part of its collective soul. The serpent rises again, not to frighten, but to remind us that in the hidden lies our medicine. And in embracing that medicine, we awaken to the true map of the stars, one that was always written, waiting for us to see it whole. When you look closely at the myths of Ophiuchus, you see the figure of the healer, the one holding the serpent, standing between heaven and earth as a bridge. In the ancient Greek imagination, he was Asclepius, the son of Apollo, whose gift was so powerful that he could heal any wound, cure any disease, and even raise the dead. For this gift, he was punished by Zeus, struck down by a lightning bolt, yet placed among the stars as a symbol of eternal healing. In Egyptian cosmology, he resonated with Imhotep, the sage and physician priest who built temples that doubled as centers of knowledge. In esoteric traditions, the serpent entwined around him was never a mark of evil, but of wisdom, energy, and rebirth. To speak of Ophiuchus resurfacing now is to speak of a prophecy quietly whispered in many traditions, that humanity will, in time, rediscover its true power to heal itself. For centuries, the healing arts were fractured, medicine split from spirit, psychology from the soul, science from wisdom. But Ophiuchus returns in the sky as if to remind us of what was forgotten. The serpent is not only DNA, but Kundalini energy, coiled at the base of the spine, waiting for awakening. It is not only medicine but transformation, the alchemy of suffering into growth. The prophecy embedded in this constellation suggests that humanity's future hinges not on conquest or material achievement, but on the restoration of balance. The Age of Aquarius, after all, is marked by collective awakening, decentralization of power, and the breaking of old systems. If Ophiuchus is woven back into the zodiac, it is like a missing frequency rejoining the cosmic scale. The 13th tone, the hidden note, suddenly makes the music whole. And when the music changes, the dance of life changes with it. Modern science is, in its own way, circling back toward this truth. Quantum biology hints that consciousness affects healing at the cellular level. Neuroscience shows that intention, meditation, and belief influence the brain and body. Epigenetics reveals that trauma, but also love and awareness, can switch genes on and off. All of these are fragments of a larger truth that the ancients encoded into myth, that healing is not only a personal act, but a collective one. When one person awakens, it ripples through the field. When one serpent rises, it stirs the collective serpent of humanity. And perhaps this is what Ophiuchus has been waiting for. Not merely to add complexity to astrology, but to point us toward our destiny, that we are a species capable of healing itself, capable of rewriting its story, capable of lifting the sickness of greed, war, and separation from its body. The healer's prophecy is not only about medicine, but about memory, remembering that we carry the serpent's wisdom within. And in this remembering, we might finally become the medicine the earth has been waiting for. Underneath the silent sweep of the heavens, there is a secret wound that never healed. It is the wound of knowledge denied, of wisdom suppressed, of a constellation deliberately erased from the map of common understanding. Ophiuchus, the 13th sign, was not merely forgotten, it was silenced. And when something is silenced so thoroughly, it is not because it was meaningless, it is because it was dangerous. The rulers of empires, both ancient and modern, have always understood that power is not simply about armies or gold. True power is about narrative. Control the story, and you control the people. If you can dictate what the heavens say, if you can decree which signs govern a person's destiny, then you are not just shaping culture. You are shaping consciousness itself. That is why Ophiuchus, the healer who dared to defy death, was cast out. His presence disrupted the story that kings and priests wanted told. Imagine a zodiac where one of the central archetypes is a healer capable of transcending mortality. What does that awaken in humanity? It whispers of freedom. It tells people that death itself might not be the end. It tells them that cycles of power, suffering, and fear are not unbreakable. That is a dangerous message for any empire built on obedience and control. The Romans feared this archetype because it undermined their state religion, which demanded offerings, temples, and loyalty to gods who held life and death as bargaining chips. Medieval rulers feared it because Ophiuchus echoed Christ-like qualities, threatening to shift attention away from institutional authority and toward personal communion with the divine. And in modern times, the scientific establishment has often dismissed the 13th sign as irrelevant, reducing it to a curiosity rather than engaging with its deeper symbolic meaning. Suppression has simply evolved into skepticism, but the fear remains. Because if people truly embraced Ophiuchus, the healer who holds the serpent of wisdom, they might begin to see themselves as sovereign beings, no longer bound to the artificial boundaries of the 12. They might begin to question who set those boundaries in the first place. The serpent itself has always been the most contested of symbols. In Sumerian myth, it was a bringer of knowledge. In the biblical story, it was demonized as the corrupter of humanity. Yet in medical symbols to this day, the rod of Asclepius, the caduceus, the serpent remains a sign of healing. What if the serpent was never the enemy, but the bridge between ignorance and wisdom? What if Ophiuchus was always meant to teach that truth? This is the great threat. Not that Ophiuchus adds another month to the calendar or shifts someone's horoscope. The threat is that it restores to humanity a narrative of empowerment, healing, and resurrection. And those who govern through fear cannot afford for people to remember that they were always meant to be healers, creators, and sovereign souls. Perhaps this is why Ophiuchus still lingers at the edges of astrology, haunting the margins. A ghost in the sky that cannot be fully erased. A quiet reminder that the greatest enemy of tyranny is not rebellion, it is healing. And the serpent in his hand still waits for us to remember what it truly means. Beneath the veils of the zodiac lies a forgotten doorway, hidden between Scorpio and Sagittarius, whispered of in fragments of ancient lore. They called it the 13th gate, the place where the serpent coils around the staff, where death and rebirth meet not as opposites, but as partners in a sacred dance. To embody Ophiuchus in your soul journey is not to chase power or cosmic recognition, but to step into the role of the eternal healer, the one who dares to face their own venom, transmute it, and carry the medicine forward for the world. When you walk through this inner gate, the first test is silence. The silence of yourself, stripped of illusions, stripped of roles, stripped of the masks that gave you comfort. In this silence, you hear the hiss of the serpent, not as a threat, but as the rhythm of life itself. Ancient Gnostics called it the hidden Sophia, the wisdom veiled in scales. Egyptian mystics encoded it in the staff of Thoth, the caduceus twined with serpents, signifying the rise of awakened energy through the spine, the meeting of opposites in harmony. But the 13th gate is not entered with knowledge alone. It requires a shift in being. The Mayans spoke of the 13th Baktun as a cycle of transformation, the moment when humanity would be tested between destruction and illumination. The number 13, long demonized in superstition, is in truth the number of completion, the spiral returning to its source. To embody Ophiuchus is to reclaim this sacred cycle, to no longer fear the unknown step, but to trust the spiral as it turns. This journey is not passive. The healer archetype demands sacrifice. In myth, Asclepius was struck down by Zeus for daring to raise the dead. In the Nag Hammadi texts, the savior figure enters the underworld not to conquer, but to awaken the souls trapped in forgetfulness. To carry Ophiuchus within is to carry the responsibility of awakening others, not by preaching, but by radiating the living proof that healing is possible, even in the face of death. On a personal level, the 13th gate manifests as the moments in life where you are asked to let die what no longer serves. Old patterns, toxic attachments, false identities. The venom must surface before it can be transformed. The serpent within you may thrash, but when lifted with care and discipline, it becomes a source of vision. Modern seekers who have walked this path through deep meditation, plant medicine, or near-death experiences all speak of a similar realization, that to embody Ophiuchus is to become a living bridge between worlds, between life and death, between body and spirit. The great awakening of the 13th gate is not just personal, it is collective. Humanity itself now hovers before this threshold. The hidden sign rises not only in the stars, but in the collective psyche, calling us to shed the skin of old systems and birth the new. If enough of us embody the healer, if enough of us carry the medicine of transmutation, the gate will open not just for one, but for all. When we reach the last breath of a journey, it is often the moment when the deepest truths finally reveal themselves. The question of why Ophiuchus, the 13th constellation, the serpent bearer, was erased from common knowledge is not simply a matter of astronomy. It is a matter of consciousness. For the ancients, the stars were not cold light scattered in space. They were living archetypes, gateways of power, mirrors of the soul's path. To acknowledge Ophiuchus was to acknowledge that humanity carried within it the secret of transformation, the ability to heal, to resurrect, to overcome death itself. That was never something rulers or priestly orders wished to be remembered. Knowledge that the human being was not bound to cycles of fate, but had the capacity to step beyond them, threatened every system built on control, obedience, and fear. The Babylonians, in their earliest star charts, included Ophiuchus. The Greeks spoke of Asclepius, the divine healer, whose myth is inseparable from this constellation. He was said to have received from the serpent the wisdom of rebirth and immortality. Even the Romans honored him with temples where serpents roamed freely, symbols of the eternal cycle of life, death, and renewal. And yet, when the Zodiac was codified into 12 neat signs, Ophiuchus was quietly omitted. It was not a mistake, it was a choice to streamline the heavens into a system that mirrored earthly authority, 12 divisions to match 12 months, 12 tribes, 12 apostles, 12 pillars of order. The 13th did not fit. The 13th was the disruptor. The 13th reminded us that order was not the final word, that chaos, mystery, and transcendence always slip through the cracks. Why does this matter now? Because the age we are entering demands remembrance. Astronomers may argue that Ophiuchus is not a true zodiac sign, but mystics know the truth runs deeper than classification. The serpent bearer represents the path of initiation. He is the one who dares to hold the serpent, not as an enemy, but as a teacher. In a world where systems of control still dominate, governments, religions, corporations, algorithms, the memory of Ophiuchus is dangerous. It tells you that you are not powerless, that the serpent within you, the Kundalini, the primal life force, can be awakened and directed, that you are not bound by the cage of your birth chart, your conditioning, or your fate. You are the one who can step through the 13th gate and become whole. This is the real reason it was erased, because if humanity remembered, rulers would no longer rule. Fear would lose its grip. Death would not be the end, but a transition. Healing would not be reserved for a select few, but recognized as the birthright of every soul. To remember Ophiuchus is to remember yourself, not as a passive traveler, but as a conscious co-creator of reality. This is why remembering changes everything. For when you awaken to the 13th, you awaken to the truth that has always been waiting, that you were never meant to be bound. You were always meant to ascend. Listen closely. If you've made it this far, you already know. This wasn't just a story about stars. This was about you, about the hidden gates within your soul, and the truths they never wanted you to remember. And if this resonated, it means you were meant to hear it. So now I invite you, don't stop here. This journey has only just begun. Watch our other videos where we reveal the secrets that were buried, the truths that were erased, and the paths of awakening that are opening right now. Each one is a key. Each one will take you deeper. If this spoke to you, subscribe to The Hidden Voyage. Comment below and share what stirred within you. I read every single one. Like this video if it lit something inside you, and share it with someone who's ready to awaken too. Because together, we are remembering. Together, we are unlocking the forgotten. And together, we are stepping through the gate. So join us, keep watching, and let's walk this path of hidden truths side by side. Welcome to the Hidden Voyage. Welcome home. SoulWhisper and SoulCreator. The Hidden Voyage.